Welcome to the Change Agent Podcast, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. If you are a new listener, thank you for joining us. And if you're a returning listener, thank you so much for coming back. Today, we have an exceptional guest, Mr. Mike Jones. Mike Jones is the founder and director of LBI Consulting, focusing on helping clients close gaps between strategy and execution. His extensive experience includes his honorable service in the Army of the United Kingdom, where he was a leadership instructor at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst. Mike, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so many organizations don't fail simply because they lack strategy. They fail because they find out that reality actually changes faster than what they've planned for. And in today's discussion, I want to talk a little bit about strategy, ambiguity, and future-proofing the organization. So let's get right to it. Thank you so much for joining us. Really love having you here. Please remember that in order to help us continue delivering high-end content, we'd love for you to go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. Make sure you share and like the videos. Also, you can visit us at our website at www.thechangeagent.studio. Thanks so much for being here. Now let's get back to the show. So Mike, I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind, just kind of kick us off a little bit and give us some insights about you, your experience, and some of your work.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I was a soldier before, so I'm not, born and bred into this consulting world. It sort of fell into it after I was unfortunately medically discharged from the military. And when I initially started off, I pushed all the stuff that we learned from the military and strategy aside, because I thought it wasn't useful for civilian organizations. And the more and more I started to work with organizations, I realized that there was definitely a need. There was a big need, and I was quite surprised by what people defined as strategy and how disconnected they were from reality. Since then, I've been really working to understand this gap, bring in the skills that we've learned and the skills from complexity theory, systems thinking, how to bring it on psychology, because I became a psychologist, to help organizations develop real strategy and how they actually execute it. And a lot of formulation. I'm currently writing a book. That's probably why I look so ragged and aged. I'm trying to write my book now called When Strategy Meets Reality, which will should be out later this year.
Nice. Well, congratulations on that. That's going to be exciting. I did see in some previous articles that you had talked about that release of that book, and I'm certainly hoping that we can get the link to that so we can put it in the show notes. In relation to the military support, I've found that in my experience as a former soldier as well, that organizations tend to really put a high amount of value on the leadership experience and skills that we get from the military compared to someone who, say, comes in off the street, they go to college, they learn leadership, maybe they get a degree in leadership or some kind of executive certificate in that. Have you found that your clients have been really keen to having the value that you bring because of the military service?
Yeah, I think it gives us a unique perspective because, when you talk about leadership, you want that. There's this theory of leadership, and there's an understanding of what it takes to be a leader. But, there's a difference when someone has a perspective that they've actually led.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about these experiences, you're not talking about a theory or concept. Right. You're talking real life. And I think that's what really brings it to life and can resonate a lot with people.
Yeah, for sure. On this podcast, that's what we really focus on. Like if I were to do a 10-word description, it would be experience over theory. That's just something simple and short, because it is absolutely true that so many people either in an educational setting learn something about leadership through academic means, or they go and they take a PMP course and get the certification and they come out and they think, I'm a super leader. And I can tell you more times than I can count, I've outled those people who come in and say, oh, I've got a PMP. And I didn't at the time. I do now, but I didn't at the time. And I thought, I've seen you lead before. You need more experience to get there. And
and you see it as well, especially in the military, because we're never in there talking about the perspective that we have got it right. And actually, a lot of the times we've learned because, we've done it wrong ourselves. I've made plenty of mistakes. And the thing with the military is that feedback is so quick and sharp. Like when you make a mistake, it isn't 6 months, it isn't a year. It's right there. It's instantaneous. and that's where learning comes from. And we've got leaders all around us, and we're always learning. And it's that idea that I've been wrestling with, that there's theory and strategy is a theory, learning's a theory. It's when it meets contact with reality, that's when you learn. That's when you can reorientate. I think that's where the real depth of learning comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of differences between the way people lead when they have a lot of clarity in what they're doing, and also when there's ambiguity, right? And actually, in a recent article that you posted, I believe it was posted today. In fact, I read it. It was called "The Clarity Trap," and
Yes.
you talk about the real danger for leaders isn't necessarily this lack of clarity, but the urge to impose that clarity where they think it belongs, and not necessarily. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so cool about strategic ambiguity, and it's really recognizing that the the world we're operating in, or the context we're operating in, is inherently uncertain and complex. You're never going to understand all of it. It's impossible to, and we can't define what's going to happen. And I think this is a problem. A lot of leaders think in a linear sense. They go, well, if we do this, this will happen and we'll get this result, and that's all good. Or they get so overwhelmed by uncertainty, they try to control it by imposing strict plans, and they start to define the means. And then what happens, they don't give anyone the flexibility to adapt to what's actually happening. So what we're talking about here, and it companies, a previous article I talked about was about freedom of action, is actually how do we embrace that ambiguity, recognize it's there, not try to control it, but how do we set the conditions to enable our people to adapt within that ambiguity? So we talk about clear intent, constraints, because constraints are a good thing. It's more like a feel to it. We know when we constrain someone too much, but constraints are, adding judgment, making sure that, controlling for some, well, not controlling for risk, but making sure that we're putting some guardrails in. But people have to have the requisite knowledge, skills, and experience to own that space. If they don't have that, then you can just bring those constraints in, and they still feel empowered because they've got the freedom of action that's relative to their experience. And then all we're doing is providing what we want and allowing them to use the intelligence that we want them for to sense, orientate, adapt, to change the circumstances to meet our intent.
Yeah, so many good points there. In my past, I have had leaders that have given me that flexibility to kind of bounce between guardrails, and make the freedom to make mistakes, as I termed it, the authority to make mistakes. I tell people that work for me, you have the authority to make mistakes. You need to, because you need to learn, just as you've noted as we opened up the podcast. What's your perspective on the idea of a leader being comfortable to trust others to make mistakes? Because some of them are not. They don't want to let people lead because they don't want them to make mistakes, because mistakes seem to be a bad thing to them. Yeah,
because there's different elements to this, and we always have this argument, because essentially what we're talking about is mission command, as we know it. It's that thing, and that is built on trust, and you have to have trust, otherwise you're never going to let them make decisions or make mistakes. And I always say to leaders that, what is it that's preventing you from trusting this person or this situation? And that's going to unearth a lot of things. But I always look at it and go, there must be some reason why you're not trusting this person. Is it because they're, morally corrupt? And then, why have you got them around if you think they're morally corrupt? Is it that you don't think they have the knowledge, skills, and experience? Then if that's so, bring those constraints in, and it's, you need to build up that skill and be clarity around what actually do we mean by capabilities they should have. Or is it you? Is it you don't trust them because, and then you as a leader, you need to get over yourself and always challenge them. I always say, and a lot of the thing with this trust is about the means. So are you clear about the intent? Are you unambiguously clear about what you want? And then just because that someone has chosen a way to meet that end in a way that you wouldn't do, does it mean it is wrong?
Right.
And I think that's all about perspectives. And I think with those things, you can sort of wrestle what's preventing those, and why are they scared about they're making mistakes, or not choosing a way that they would deem suitable.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned in there clarity, and there's a point where a leader can have clarity, and when it can really be a problem. And so I guess a question would be, how do leaders know, like, when clarity is really helping them and when it's really quietly making things worse for them?
Yeah, I think, and that's where, a lot of we talk about the feel, how you knew that you'll get this from experience, but really, when we talk about intent, is the commander's intent. Am I clear, unambiguously about what I want? When you start to define how,
Mm-hmm.
that's when we start to get in trouble. So,
Yeah.
this is what I want to achieve, and we can agree what the success measures look like. And the thing is, the clarity is always, or the power of the clarity is in the interpretation. So, and this is the perceptual complexity that we face as leaders. That I can define something in a way, but you, Eric, you could perceive that in a completely different way, because
Yeah.
we are unique, we're different. So the power is in that interpretation. I give you that intent, and hopefully the intent is what I'm not going into the how, but then I give you time to assimilate that and play it back.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then I can see that we're aligned.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were cases that I've had in various programs that I've led where people have come in to do some specific role. It could be one that was already incumbent to the program that we were working on, or a new one that we added. And one of my favorite questions to ask those people is, after I give them the directive, okay, Bob, you're going to be standing up a backend server for whatever. And they'll say, well, what's the deliverable, and what does your success look like? They'll ask me that question. What does successful look like to you? And I'll say, no, what does success look like to you? Because if I define it and I'm not a technical expert on building servers, I have no idea. Likewise, just as you mentioned, the definition of success can change based on where those people are at, the solutions they use, all those boundaries and things like that. Yeah. So it's really an interesting concept to allow people to make mistakes, to have them help you build that successful strategy going into a particular task.
And that's the fallacy. I think this is where we get stuck up as leaders, that there is a way, there's a linear way that needs to happen, but it doesn't ever happen that way. I mean, Klaus Fitz and von Moltke always said that, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And that's what it's like. It's like we can, I can define a way of doing something, but I'm never going to know how that's going to meet, and I'm going to have to adapt. But the end state can still be met. And I think when we got people that are enacting for us, we just need to make sure that they have perceived it in the way they have, that they have freedom of action, and we are clear on what we call the in order to. I need you to do this in order for us to achieve that. And that gives them initiative, because they know what it's for. That means that not only can they adapt, but they can also take initiative.
Yeah. The U.S. Army's definition of leadership is to provide purpose, motivation, and direction. And those things that you've just talked about are, the epitome of that particular definition. You also talked about plans, which I thought was a really good segue into this question I've got that as we chatted a little bit earlier, you noted that strategy is more of a practice rather than a particular plan. So can you talk about that as well? Because that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it's I've been trying to figure out this problem for a while, and during the book, a lot of it I've been looking at the history of strategy and where it came from. I'm less sort of interested in the chronological part of it, but more about what was strategy conceived to be, to where it is now. And if you look back into where it was conceived, and times of Sun Tzu and all that lot, it was really about strategy was a way of thinking, it was a way of being, it was a way that we can observe, orientate, make sense of what's happening, and then we can adapt to our advantage. Where we've come to this sort of transient phase from sort of the Industrial Revolution to management by objectives, and we sort of lost our way. And I think on a belief that the world is stable, that organizations are now treating strategy not as a way of being, but an object, an output.
Mm-hmm.
And they treat strategy as this document, this static document. And as soon as you do that, you start losing touch with reality and about touch with the adaptation that you need to survive and actually meet any sort of strategic aim.
Yeah. The direction of strategy is important. I think from my personal experience, sitting in the boardroom with leadership, and they are asking us to come up with strategies for cross collaboration, cross-team collaboration, cross-functional collaboration. How does what you do, Eric, on your program tie into what Chris is doing on his program? And can you put those things together and go forward? This talk of strategy about putting things together to make something more valuable is great, but they never explained the direction of where that was going to go. Never beyond the boardroom. It was always, if you can answer this question, you guys get a trophy. But then we would always ask, like, well, then what are you going to do with it? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And it creates confusion within the organization, and that you don't want that in an organization, because the edges to the organization, the people who are actually acting or interacting with the external environment, they're your sensors. You need them to feed back what's happening for your orientation. As soon as we cut that off and we think that we can just centralize the idea, then we're going to slow the organization down, and we're going to get this what we call incestuous amplification, this internal view, a bureaucracy, people then diverging off doing things, not because they're morally wrong, it's just because they haven't got that direction. They don't know how the whole is meant to move together.
Mm-hmm. When leaders aren't visually watching this field, things like that can certainly creep up, and they're kind of all over the place. Ooh. And you can tell now, like even, what was it? So the Project Management Institute released the Project Management Body of Knowledge, the PMBOK Guide, edition 7, I don't know, last year sometime, maybe the year before. I don't remember when. But what I noticed, and everybody else talked about it before it was coming, and even in edition 6, not to talk about PMI too much because that's boring, but is that they really went from a predictive model of project management. This is what you do. You have all of these particular knowledge areas, and you have all the roles, and here's the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's how you successfully run a project. And then they started integrating all the agile stuff, the agility parts of that. And that's when you were talking, it was what was in my mind was, even the people who are experts in project management realize the importance of strategy and agility in leadership. And now the exams for PMP are much different than they used to be. They're much more scenario based. You have to be an agile thinker, both in terms of being agile and having agility in the way you approach problems. Yeah, I think still, but regardless, as valiant as that effort is to try to improve how leaders act today, I still see leaders that just can't let go. They just can't stop doing what they do. And it creates this vice grip, which creates so many problems.
Yeah. And that's what really stymies execution, because they're not given any freedom of action. And you think, why do we need these people if you're just going to tell them what to do?
Right.
And that then sort of really feeds into this hero type persona we have of leaders, that, a leader of an organization, a leader, one person of, say, 100, 500 to thousands of people really makes a difference. So regardless of everything else going on, which I've never believed in. And actually, it's how do we set the conditions in the organization that people have that clear intent, they have the decision rights, which is really important. And I think it's overlooked in organizational design, and they have the inputs to make those decisions. Yeah. You'll make it far more adaptive, self-organizing team or organization, which will be able to match the uncertainty or the complexity that you face. Otherwise, you'll never win. You always lose out to reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why there's loads of different definitions. I define strategy as the ongoing active orientation. So how does an organization continuously interpret, adapts, and acts within the environment to sustain advantage and viability? And just that alone, that interpretation, allowing that understanding, how do we adapt, and then how do we enable people to act, is really important.
Yeah. If you don't keep your eyes on the road, who knows where you'll end up?
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about challenges and different things like that. Your clients with your company, they span, doing some research, I saw that they span everything from rail. I mean, these are completely different sectors of work, rail to healthcare to infrastructure. But in some cases, if you were to ask, I would bet, if you were to ask some people like, oh, wait, rail has their own unique set of challenges. Healthcare has their own, and they do. And infrastructure has their own set of challenges. Have you found that there's a common challenge that kind of spans all of these diverse sectors?
Yeah, there is. There's quite a few, and I think it's a more common thing nowadays. One is the structural problem, which I don't think they really ever look at. So I think we're too quick to talking in effects or behavioral terms. Like we want our people to be empowered, or we want our people to be more agile. We want this culture. We want that culture. We want you to do this. But none of them actually look at the structure which drives that behavior. So they say we want to be empowered, but there's no clarity on decision rights. No one's got the resources to actually make a decision. So no wonder. And I think the biggest challenge in there, they don't really understand that the structure drives the behavior, and how they do that. They just look on it's like a big communications exercise for them. Yeah.
There was a book that I was reading recently from a gentleman named Eric Nuzum, I believe it is, regarding audio things in the world. And one of the particular bits of his book that I found really interesting was that in some of the post interviews, so after he's done the interview, the individuals come on board, or maybe it's somebody internal that they've applied to a position and he's awarded it to them. He typically has been asking them right in the initial days of them starting in that role, tell me about your next job. And what he does that for is he tries to solicit ideas from them about what they want to do next, so that he can put them in positions that help them grow to that. And that's it reminded me, this thing that you were just talking about reminded me of that story. And and it's, I think in terms of leadership too, that uncertainty is a real problem, because if you're leading in uncertainty, that ambiguity, you may not know where to start. You may not know what your boundaries are. You may not know if you have authority, which is a big problem. Some people have it, they don't know it, or they think they have it and they don't, whichever way it goes. Regarding leading in uncertainty, have you found things that stand out to you?
Yeah, it's quite, there's a lot to unpack in that sort of leading in uncertainty.
That's a big question.
Yeah. There's different types of uncertainty. Obviously, you've got the uncertainty of the lack of knowledge. There's always going to be a lack of information, lack of knowledge there. There's the external uncertainty, just through the thing of chance. We can't predict everything. So that all comes in. And I think it really comes back to what we're talking about how we lead in those things. Like one is we need to get, especially on as a leader, you're not on your own. You've got loads of different people there. So we need to be able to have the humility to listen, to actually understand different perspectives, because we've got the darkness principle that's always in play. There's always elements of darkness we're not going to know, but actually if we can listen to different perspectives, we can actually start to see a bit more. It's interesting to see from your perspective, what do you see and what's that mean? Why is that different to what I'm seeing? Is there something I'm missing? So we can try and help that way. The other part is that don't try and predict beyond your intent. So don't try and predict the perfect plan or the perfect roadway. Just be very clear on your intent. And, as I said in my article today, hold your intent firmly and your plans loosely,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
let your ego go. And I
Great
think that's
advice.
yeah, and I think that's the key. It's all about be very razor clear about the intent of what you're trying to achieve, as in not the end state. And I think this is a big challenge that we have in strategy. People try to determine an end state. Oh yeah, 2020 is always 5 years. 2030 we will be this, and we will like. But it's not that way. It's more. I see it more as a trajectory. We know where we're going. We've got an intent. We've got to be flexible in how we're there, how we get there,
Mm-hmm.
because you've got the organization in the way that it's constructed. You have will limit what's possible in the organization because of capabilities and that. But the strategy itself will have a relationship with the organization, because if you're going to make those, you need to adapt your organization to be able to achieve those. And all those things aren't that predictable. So we need to put ourselves in a way that we can constantly orientate and observe and adapt to new information,
Yep.
and always be aware of what's afforded to us, take those affordances, and then obviously orientate, observe, and see where you are.
Yeah. The ability to do that is difficult for some people, either because they haven't gotten they don't have the mentality to try to figure out how to recognize when they need to reorientate. Innovation is stagnant in some places when there's not creativity, or at least a condonement of creativity. I was watching a video today on Steve Jobs' period between the time he led Apple in the beginning and the time he came back, in that middle part. And the interviewer asked, what's the difference between Apple when you were there, when you weren't, and now, and where do they need to go? And it was, in the beginning, we had people we all had great ideas. We encouraged them to go out and chase those ideas and make something from that. And then it went to a stagnant position where we told you what we wanted you to do and how you were going to do it. And it caused a severe drain of all the innovation that Apple had. And then when he came back, he changed it. And he thinks that that's what kind of got Apple back to its glory. And I really believe that that's the same part. But at the same time, there are plenty of characteristics of really good leaders. And I think you termed that as the integration of psychometrics into leadership. And you talk a little bit about that in some of your articles and some of the work that you've done, the integration of psychometrics into leadership development and how to make strategic decisions off of those. Can you dive into that a little bit? Because it's really interesting.
Yeah. So I think this all comes into about the perceptual complexity, and also what we call the cognitive diversity. So everybody talks about the having diversity, and that's great, but I think we missed a lot around the cognitive part.
Mm-hmm.
How do people see things differently, and why do they see things differently, and why is that good? Because why do we want, in the sense that everyone thinks the same? Because I've got that, and I think that's the sort of the traditional view, isn't it? That I say as a leader, everyone thinks like me, and if they all think like me, then it will be successful. But we know that's not true, because
Right.
we are all unique. It's like my mum used to tell me when I was younger that I'm special, and yeah, she was
Mine did too, but
right.
I don't think she meant it in a good way.
And I think we're all unique, and I think I use those a lot to make that clear, that we are unique. And there's no I've seen a lot of time when people use psychometrics and that they use it to say, you're this, you're red, you're yellow, so you can only do that. But it's not that at all. It's about yes, we do have tendencies, and sort of what we call predispositions towards behavior, but you can do any aspect of it. It just takes more energy, cognitive energy, to be able to do that. And recognizing that means that, one, you can either dial up to do that, or you recognize that we have other people here that have a better tendency for that, and they can help with that. And we can start to recognize that actually people that see things differently is not a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Diversity in thought and practice is a good thing.
Yeah, it is,
Yeah.
because Clausewitz talks about this in the frictions, and the friction is that the challenge is in leadership is that everyone is different.
Yeah.
Because that really means that you have to listen to understand. You have to make sure that people, are interpreting what you're saying in the manner it was meant. But it's also a real advantage if you've got people that are different, because as you're back to your point about uncertainty, when things are uncertain, when there is very limited knowledge or information, that's where we need the collective intelligence to really understand problems and
Mm-hmm.
challenges. And if we don't have that, then what's the point? If we're not using the collective intelligence of a people, then why do we have them?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a conversation I remember some time ago about the idea of how hard it is for a leader to get a hold of his own or her own metacognition to understand how that ties into empathetic leadership, to put yourself in someone else's shoes, or to recognize and step outside of yourself that what you said or did was incorrect or not appropriate or ineffective, whatever the cases are.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a big deal for me personally. That was on one hand, it was the easiest thing for me to grasp because I'm naturally empathetic. On the other hand, though, this often works much, much faster than this. And I get myself in too much trouble. And so I had to become, just out of necessity, I had to become good at being able to step out and say, you shouldn't have done that. And in that brief moment, now it's grown, it's kind of evolved to where someone on my team might say something that kind of gets me, and I can feel it bubbling a little bit.
Yeah.
But there's that brief moment where I can enter this metacognitive part where I can say, don't say what you're thinking. Just try to help guide them into the correct position they need to be in.
Yeah.
And it's irrelevant of where it's where I want them to be. It's where they should be to exceed.
Yeah.
So,
And you bring a really good point. And I suppose this is where we really think about the dynamics of leadership. Because I think for too long, the leader is always seen to be the one that should be speaking and talking, and you have to provide everything. But if we look back on what we defined, strategy as the constant orientation, you don't get that yourself. You get it from the people around you. So you need to be in that space where you generally, you'll stop and you're listening to understand from their perspective. And that's really hard to have that. You've got to have great humility, get your ego. But this is where that constant gap happens with organizations, where the people come disconnected. So what's actually happening on the ground in their organization, it is different to their mental model, their world, their orientation that they're using to understand that. And the reason is because they're not listening.
yeah.
And they're just relying on metrics going up, saying, "Oh yeah, it's the watermelon thing. They say it's green, but it's red." Leaders, and I say this, leaders need to step down several layers of the organization to get the edges, to listen, to understand. Not there to talk. You're not there to grandstand. You're not there to make yourself look good. As many leaders do, they go, "Oh, we're going to have a walkout Wednesday, so we're more visible." It's not about you being visible. It's about you listening, so that when you go back to make decisions, your decisions are grounded on the reality of what's actually happening in the organization. And you can only do that if you get to that, like you call that metacognitive level, where you're listening to different perspectives
Yeah.
and trying to understand it.
Do you think you find some leaders describing that as a situation where someone needs additional support as an inconvenience versus an opportunity? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
Like you see it from leaders where, if and this is where this whole narrative comes from, and this is my problem with purpose statements and all these other things, these marketing things that people put up, because it becomes a narrative, and then as soon as someone in the organization is deemed to talk different from the narrative, they're a problem. They're not really trying to understand where's this emerging from. Um, have they got the right resources? I worked with a client once, and was really interesting because I got that when they were talking, I was like, something's not right from what I understand to what they're saying. So I said, let's do, and I often do this actually. Let's draw the organization. You're not allowed to use the box model that we normally use. Let's draw it, and I want to know where things interact.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them had drawn a function that didn't exist. They actually removed that function from their decisions about 3 years ago, but no one dared tell them that things are problems. So all the people on the ground were just trying to hold it together and appease them rather than having that real honest conversation because they didn't want to listen.
Yeah.
That's dangerous.
It is very. I don't know. I suspect that it's the same going from the UK Army or military service of any kind of any armed force. But I know it's definitely true in the United States. Well, I've seen several times where people have retired from a specific branch of service, Army, Marine Corps, whatever, and they get into a corporate environment. And I talked a little bit about empathetic leadership. We talked about metacognition. We talked about all these interesting concepts of being a good leader, things you should have in the background, and how often that, well, let me rephrase that, how seldom those things come packed with the leader that exits the military, because obviously military leadership in its package has a specific mission that it has to do. There are things and reasons why we do the way we do things. And when we transition over into a corporate world that does not have those same types of missions, life and death necessarily, the empathy, the model leader is a little bit different than what we find. And the reason I asked you that question before was because of inconvenience. Is because when I came out, I was like, okay, things are not the same. I am corporate. I'm not in the military anymore. So I shouldn't yell at people because they're 5 minutes late or weren't 10 minutes early to the 10 minutes early thing that we do.
Yeah.
I'm going to make you do push-ups. And so I find that even today, in today's environment, and people that I've talked to who are retired military, they just get out. And I've been out of the military since 2010, retired out of the Army, combat tours, Afghanistan, Iraq. I've got lots of reasons to not necessarily be super empathetic. But as I've come out and I've immediately ingrained myself that that's what I need, I still meet leaders today that have retired 6 months ago, and they've come into a corporate environment to work for me and said, okay, Mr. Adams, this is what we're going to do. And I think that this is how we ought to need to do it, whatever the case. And I'm like, hey, you need to cool it. Cause that's not what we're doing. And I'm saying that as a former military person to you, that we need to cool it. And that's not, take the sergeant ranks off and thank you for all that you did, but that's not going to apply here. And it really starts to create things if you don't give the people the ability to say, hey, try to figure out how to model your leadership after someone that you'd want to be led by. And don't treat every problem as an inconvenience. And so it's and crazy to me.
I think with leadership is like, don't feel that you have to have the answers. You don't need to have the answers. You just need to give, and this is not abdication of responsibility, is that you just need to give the what you want and provide the constraints. Allow them to. And there's a really useful thing that happens in the military that actually, if done well, really helps in organizations. And this is the concepts of back briefing, in the sense that it's a dialogue. Like Eric, you work for me. You're an expert in this. I'm not the expert you are. So this is what we're trying to achieve. And I'm going to give you space to assimilate that, go away, think about, well, what does that mean to her? What they're trying to do? You're going to come back and you say, Mike, I thought about it. This is what I'm going to plan to do.
Yeah.
Actually, I could do this, but to do this, I need you to release these constraints.
Mm-hmm.
Are you happy to do that? And if you do that, I can do this. I'm like, yeah, cool, happy days. And we have it. It's about that dialogue. If we don't have that dialogue, all that's going to happen is I'm going to give an order. You're blindly going to say yes. And then you're going to go back, and we're just going to miss loads of opportunity, and we're just not going to execute. We're just going to be so slow, so stymied, and you're going to hit your next barrier. You're going to come back to me and ask for permission to something, and all it's going to be is this constant back and forth for permission when you're the expert.
Yep. This last program that I led is a very good example of that. large program, very complex, lots of things that I didn't know about. When I got selected to be the PM, I was terrified because I was like, I don't know how to do any of that. And it was only 6 years ago. And so I was like, someone told me, you don't have to be an expert in everything. You just need to help guide them in the direction it was. And so the very first meeting that we had all the experts sitting around this virtual table because it was right in the middle or right after the beginning of COVID. And I was not very sure of how we were going to run this $400 million Department of Defense project with things that I knew nothing about, from configuration management to stakeholder engagement, all these different things they were working on, risk people, contract practices. And I found that pretty quickly, if I just focused on getting the people what they needed, opening up and removing the obstacles and letting them go, I was fine. And it turns out that at the end of the 5 years after running that project, someone asked me, like, how did you do so well? Because in the beginning, admittedly, the company was not in a great position with the particular client that we had. Afterwards, we had an absolutely stellar relationship with them. So we not only were we successful, but we had changed the perception of the company's practices in the face of a customer, which is really, really nice. And I told them, the only thing I did was I gave them what they asked for. I gave them room to make mistakes, and I got out of the way. And that was how easy, if you put it in that particular model.
Exactly, yeah. And when people think about it, like, what you're trying to do is you've got your teams, they're there. You just need to be really clear about what is the outcome that you're expecting, like what's the intent, and then make sure that they've got the inputs that they need to be able to make those decisions. So they've got the resources, they've got there's the right constraints in there, and then the other part is what often gets missing is coordination. So you want these teams to be adaptable as possible, but you don't want them to have conflict. So you just need to think about, well, what would cause conflict and how can we meaningfully coordinate that so that we can dampen that conflict and they can still act autonomously if possible without messing each other over. You sort those out, you find that clarity, you're giving them the inputs that they need, and you're doing that coordination. People will adapt and they will take ownership and they will take initiative.
Yeah, that's when you have that self-running machine. It's a beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And as we're kind of focusing on the back end of this particular discussion with you, I want to talk a little bit about lack of strategy in organizations. So obviously, when you and I have experienced in the military, what makes the military, I think, unique in terms of leadership is that everyone from the colonel all the way down to the lowest ranking soldier, they know the intent. And when one happens to get removed from the equation, the next one steps up and they know where they have to go. What do you recommend to leaders that they focus on the most, or mainly the most, when they assess that there's a lack of strategy in the organization? How do they go about kind of re-energizing strategy?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I've been looking at the sort of disconnect. So I always view that you have essentially an identity or grand strategy, and then you have strategy. And when people are doing strategy, they tend to get the two confused. So the normal scenario is come to the end of the year or start of the year, they do a strategy day. Leaders spend most of the time making marshmallow towers and playing with Lego, and eventually they'll come up with some vision statement or purpose statement that really is confusing, because it's sort of asking an existential question of who they are and what they do, or it's all about aspiration. And then it will be some priorities that are not really anything. They're normally worded in effects. Oh, we want to have customer satisfaction, or we want to have employees happy in the workplace. They're all effects. They're not really strategy. Where what I'd ask them to do is really understand what you are as an organization. So Stafford Beer talks about this is in Posywid. The purpose of the system is what it does. So not a purpose statement is that, oh, we're going to, like, I wrote an article not long ago, start with reality, not why, because I was looking at all these organizations, and you had like a banking group whose purpose was to help Britain prosper. That's not what you do. That's not what you do. So first of all, I'd get them to go back and really think about what is it that you do as grounded in reality, by means of how, and that's really your capabilities of how you actually enable that to make sure that one, the two are the same. Once you have that and you've got clarity around your constraints and stuff like that's good. That's what I call your grand strategy. That's enduring. That doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
And then strategy then is thinking about, well, understanding that and understand what's possible. How do we interact with the external environment to maintain viability and to our advantage? And once you've got clarity around those, it becomes a lot easier to sort of understand what is actually a strategy. And then once you have that clarity, you can give clear direction to your people, because you're saying, to enable us to achieve this strategy, we need to do these things. Like, I don't know, R&D needs to reduce its cycle time by 12 months to 6 months in order for us to be faster in producing new products into the thing. So you can give that direction.
Yeah.
This marketing needs to do this, and it makes it a lot clearer.
Yeah, for sure. Clarity in that mission statement can cause, the lack of clarity can cause it. One of the exercises that I used to do back in the day was I'd have a mission statement on the board when on our, let's say there's a project that we have a kickoff meeting, and I have that mission statement up on the board. That mission statement, I either pulled from a performance work statement, or I got it from the company, or I got it from some other organizational asset we have, a historical document, whatever the case is, the proposal, wherever we got it. And I'd put that whole thing on the board, and I would tell people that the object of this game that we're about to play is for you to reduce as many words on that board, but keep the same theme of that mission to help introduce clarity into what it is you're going to do and why we come here to do what we do. And so the game is that an individual would go up to the board and they would either erase or scratch out a word. And the rule is it can't change the meaning, and they can't introduce new words. You just got to keep removing them until you end up with a process of going from 40 to 10 to 5 words, but still keeping the same. And that's what you go to work for. But yeah.
And that's a really crucial thing in what we call, we say that the plan is nothing, the planning is everything. And in that planning process, the plans will be useful up to a point, and then to the point they will disintegrate, and we need to adapt to new ones, because that's just the way that complexity and uncertainty is. But when you've got that point where you go, you got your people in, and you say, "This is my intent. I want you to stretch that. I want you to understand, what your part in it is you play in, and why. I want to understand what challenges that you're going to have to do this. Now, how are you going to do it? What barriers are we going to face? What risks there need to be? Why are they risks? And and we're gonna really have this conversation, or we're gonna model it, we're gonna plan it, because it's not really about the plan at the end. It's about that. It is about that that cognitive process we've gone through, that we've thought about these possibles. So when we hit problems, it's suddenly not going to disintegrate. We've actually sort of thought about it, and it gives us that point to adapt from, rather than everything being a surprise because we've not thought about it. We've not tried to plan it. We've given us no cognitive adaptability.
Yeah. The other part about leadership, in terms of strategy and all the things we've talked about, also rests kind of on the confidence of the people that are above you. Being in the military, we both recognize the term leadership climate. Kind of as a closing question to you, what are some recommendations or some advice you can give to us that when we go into an organization, we've got all the best intent. We know the intent of our our immediate supervisor. We know the intent of what it is we're trying to do, but the leadership climate from the people above that individual, it could be the VP, it could be whatever, is just sour. What do we do in a situation like that? What are some of the things that you've experienced and that you want to pass on to us? I have a lot, but on my own, but everyone's different, right? I mean, it depends a lot of the situation, but
often, people will look at that and go, well, what's the point in doing anything? Because, they'll just change their minds or anything like that. And everyone then starts to look at, I always find that people look negatively at everything. and everything becomes a constraint, and we forget that we've actually got, freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
And we forget that and I always say that you should always acknowledge your constraints and challenge them where possible, but you must exploit your freedoms. In there, there's stuff that what have they told you, what haven't they told you can't do?
Mm-hmm.
Exploit it. And a lot of the times it's pretty easy to discern what's going on. There's only so many options. So I think with that, don't worry too much about those. Just if you don't have the clarity you need, fight for it and ask for it, but don't get bogged down in your constraints or the negativity. Understand the context you're in, recognize your constraints, challenge them where possible, but always exploit your freedoms, because there are plenty of them. We just miss them.
Wow, that's a good clip. I hope people are listening to that, because it's really good advice. It sort of energizes me a lot. And I want to say that was our last one. But Mike, having you on board on the podcast has been really awesome. Above all that, the work that you're doing, the work at the company, the articles and stuff that you put out that I was, tracking and listening to, and the podcast and all that stuff that you've done was caught my attention long before you were able to come over. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with me on the show. I really do appreciate it. It's making a big difference, to believe it or not. And I wish you nothing but success in the future. And hopefully we can get you on again for a future podcast as well, to talk more about these types of things.
Oh, I'd love to. And thank you for having me on. I love your work. And same. Let's do it, because we can all start changing the, leadership perspective.
Absolutely.
One show at a time.
One show at a time. Well, thank you so much, Mike. It was good chatting with you, and we'll catch up with you very shortly.
Yeah, definitely. Take care, buddy.
You as well.